So at that same event we were showing you yesterday where the President of the United States said the Kurds weren't with us at Normandy and that alliances are easy, he turned into a riff about greeting the dignified remains of fallen service members when they come to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. It's one of the most solemn responsibilities a president has. Here's the president talking about that yesterday.
I go to Dover when I can, but it's so devastating for the parents that, you know, it's so devastating when they bring that boy or young woman out of the back of those big, powerful planes in a coffin, and the parents are there. You know, we have people that do that. That's what they do. They work that. They accommodate everybody. That's what they do. They do an incredible job. And I said, the parents seem to be okay. I'll get there early. The parents seem to be okay. Well, actually, sir, they aren't. No, the way they're talking, they're really okay, aren't they? Sir, you never know until the back of that massive cargo plane opens up and they walk down holding a coffin with 4 or 5 great soldiers on each side of it, representing our various forces. That you never know. And then I see it, and I see people that were smiling. Oh, Mr. President, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. And I think they're doing great. And then 20 minutes later, we'll be outside when that big plane pulls up and that door comes down. And they are walking the coffin with their boy inside this coffin with an American flag over the top. And they're walking that coffin down this ramp. And I've seen people that I thought were really incredible the way they would. I didn't even understood how they could take it so well. Scream like I've never seen anything before. Sometimes they'll run to the coffin. They'll break through military barriers. They'll run to the coffin and jump on top of the coffin, crying, mothers and wives crying desperately.
So, Admiral Stavridis, the context there, if there is any, is that the President of the United States was talking about why he wants to bring troops home. He was defending his move in Turkey. He's not bringing troops home there, but that's a separate issue about why he wants to get out of the wars to prevent scenes like the one he's describing there about the dignified transfer of remains at Dover Air Force Base. But obviously, that's a very private and solemn moment for those families.
It is, and that, I think, in the end is a hurtful event in 3 ways. One is that here's the president effectively acting like a camera, describing in very emotional, private detail what happens there. It's inappropriate. That's why we don't have cameras in situations like that. Secondly, it's kind of using that as a political prop to articulate policy decisions. It just doesn't feel right. And thirdly, it kind of feels like dragging the military, our one institution that is resolutely nonpartisan, dragging it into the maelstrom of politics. I don't think that was a good move on the part of the president, any more than having a discussion at Arlington National Cemetery would be in terms of the politics of the moment. I don't think that is going to be well received, and I don't think it was a very appropriate level of communication about a very solemn moment.
Jonathan Lemire, it's just a violation of trust of heartbroken families who are going through an already excruciating process.
That's right, Joe. It's one of the most sacred duties a president has. By our count, the president has been to Dover twice since taking office, only 2 times to greet the remains of fallen soldiers. Let's also, of course, remember this is a president who has had a number of feuds with Gold Star families, the families of those who lost their lives in our service, both during the campaign and since taking office. Admiral, one last question for you. During that same event yesterday, the president was also defending his decision to pull back troops from U.S. troops from Syria. He was asked about how this could sort of embolden ISIS and lead a number of their prisoners to escape. And his defense to that was, well, yes, but they'll be escaping to Europe as opposed to the United States. Talk about what that means and how destabilizing and dangerous that is for the countries, some of whom are our closest allies.
They are our closest allies. The 28 nations of NATO in Europe, United States, Canada, and North America, of course. The remainder are our closest allies and friends, a pool of partners who share our values, who come and fight and die alongside us in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, in the Balkans, on piracy missions around the world. I led those missions. I know the quality of those troops. And to sort of say, yeah, it's not a problem for us because they're not coming into our country, ignores the greatest single comparative advantage the United States has in the world, and it's the trust of our allies. So it's not only those Europeans, it's our Asian allies, our Latin American allies. All of them see that, and they see the back of the hand from the president. It is chilling to contemplate the end game if this continues and continues and continues in terms of America's stature with our allies in the world.
Well, of course, Mika, we remember the attacks in Paris, the horrid attacks in Paris and across other European capitals as ISIS was spreading terror in 2015. We remember those attacks, and we remember Donald Trump's vicious takedown of Barack Obama and how he wasn't handling ISIS. Donald Trump would be tough enough to defeat ISIS. Well, Donald Trump is basically allowing ISIS off the mat. And he says, and again, it just shows something that everybody has known, really. I mean, even the Republicans that cower in the corner for the past several years have known. He is ill-equipped emotionally and mentally to be America's commander-in-chief. But he actually said yesterday, oh, don't worry about ISIS. Don't worry about ISIS. They're just going to all flood back into Europe, as if there's not a way for them to get from Europe to the United States, to Charlotte, North Carolina, to New York City, to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, to Fresno, California, you name it. They can figure out a way to get back here, and Donald Trump's releasing them, and he knows he's releasing them. But also, yesterday brought up another memory for our producers. The president is, as Admiral Stavridis said, just showing extraordinarily poor form in betraying the confidence of the parents of those fallen soldiers. It reminds me of when he did an interview in Normandy. Remind our producers when he did an interview in Normandy where he was attacking Nancy Pelosi and attacking his political allies with the crosses of Normandy behind him. Republicans, this man is not suited to be commander-in-chief. You've known it all along, but he's showing you every single day. You own every action he takes. You own the re-emergence of ISIS. You own the betrayal of the Kurds. You own the continued rise of Iran across the Middle East. You own this warfare now from Turkey into Syria. You own the Russians' continued expansion across the Middle East. You own all of this unless you remove this man, unless you vote to remove this man from office. It's that simple. And Mika, the Fox poll is just the latest poll that suggests that's what most Americans want now.
Retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much. The Admiral has a new piece in this week's issue of Time magazine entitled Trump and the Troops. An impulsive president shows no inclination to use the forces he celebrates. We'll be reading that. And we look forward to having you back on the show on Monday for your new book. Admiral, thank you very much. And still ahead, former Vice President Joe Biden has been in the Senate for 2 impeachments, so he knows the stakes. Now, for the first time, he's making a direct call for President Trump's impeachment. That conversation is next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.